All right, my friends, if you're the kind of reader who reaches for historical fiction, you probably are well acquainted with our next guest. Author Genevieve Graham has been weaving fact with fiction, creating best-selling books that both entertain and educate us. Her newest novel is bringing readers to the Vietnam War, but through a little-known Canadian lens. The novel is called On Isabella Street. It focuses on two women in the 60s who don't seem to have that much in common with each other than their address, because they both live in the same apartment on, you guessed it, Isabella Street in Toronto. Genevieve Graham is joining us this morning from Alberta Beach, just outside Edmonton. Good morning. Welcome back to the show.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me, Teddy.
So you last spoke with Anne-Marie about 4 or 5 years ago about your last book. With this one, as I said off the top, you're writing about Canadians and the Vietnam War in the late 60s, and you're doing it through the lens of these two women. One is a psychiatrist, the other is a bit of a hippie folk singer. What made you pick this topic and these two women through which to tell the story?
It always seems so random, doesn't it? All of my books are written about, they're historical fiction, but they're written about Canadian history. And I write about parts of Canadian history that we really haven't been taught enough about, in my opinion. And a lot of them are around military events, because the Canadians are really part of a lot of things that we don't talk about. So when I started writing this one, I wanted to write more up to date, like closer to now. And I thought, oh, maybe I better write about the Korean War, because the Canadians were involved there. But I also had a little personal thing. I was thinking, wouldn't it be fun if I could make my main character, one of them, the grandson of my main character in my first book, Tides of Honor. And so I did the math and I figured out the only age I could do that for would be the Vietnam War. So that's when I started writing about that. And as soon as I did that, I thought, well, it wasn't the Canadians. What do I do? And as soon as I researched, I realized that between 20 and 40,000 Canadians went down to fight in the Vietnam War. They had to sign up as Americans. And about the same number of people came up from the States as war resistors or draft dodgers. So once I got into all of that, I really wanted to write about everything else that's happening in 1967. It was the hugest social, cultural change that had been seen, and with all the folk music and all the, free love and drugs, but also protests and feminism and so many other things. So I brought in Marion, who's a psychiatrist, and Sassy, who is my little folk singer hippie girl, and I merged them together just to see how they could get along.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time in history, as you say, optimism, but also delusionment, a time of great social upheaval as well. You mentioned your two main characters, Sassy, the singer, but Marion is a psychiatrist. And I want to ask you about this because she's fighting deinstitutionalization. This was something happening between the late 1960s and the 1980s. For folks who are unfamiliar with deinstitutionalization, can you tell us a little bit about it and maybe the effects that are still being felt today?
Oh, yes, I can. I did not know a thing about this, which is usually how it goes for me with history, because I slept through history class. I thought Canadian history was boring, and now I know quite the opposite. Deinstitutionalization is, well, besides being a word that took me a long time to learn to say out loud, it was the shutting down of mental health institutions. It happened all across Europe and the U.S., but it happened in Canada. It actually started in, I believe it was Winnipeg in the 50s, and then it spread across. What they wanted to do there was, for probably 100 years, the mental institutions, or insane asylums as they were called, they were bedlam, right? They did a lot of things that shouldn't have been done. There was a lot of torture. There was a lot of unnecessary treatments, so-called treatments, that were quite violent, quite brutal. And so the people in general wanted freedom for these patients, to let them get out and live a normal life. And the government wanted to save some money for it. So they let them out and they opened mental health centers. And that all sounds very nice, except that a lot of these people didn't even know how to tell time, so they wouldn't show up for their appointments. They certainly couldn't have known how to take their medicines when they needed it. They wouldn't have known, where to go to get food. And that eventually would have turned to homelessness of today. And it also would have turned to force them to go for crime, really, to feed themselves, to find someplace. And they'd end up in jail sometimes. And then if you think about it, the government's whole plan of cutting back on money is reversed because there aren't the number of volunteers in jails as there were in the institutions. So the institutionalization was supposed to be as a social experiment, I suppose, that went horribly wrong. The last time I was here, I spoke about the Forgotten Home Child, another social experiment that went very wrong. So a lot of that happening around here.
Yeah, no, it's so much important history to be aware of. And thank you so much for your work for this book and for illustrating this for all of us. Really appreciate you being with us. Genevieve Graham, thanks very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And a reminder, Genevieve's new book is called On Isabella Street, and it is out now. After the break, Chad Michael Murray and Morgan Cohen